This video is called Legality versus Reality, and I'm going to cite the things that are on my YouTube channel as examples, conversations with people as examples. Now, legally, there are steps that I should be able to take, and I followed those steps. They got me nowhere. The reality is it got me nowhere. Legally, it's against the law for Natalie and her friends to stalk me the way that they did for an entire year before she was killed. The reality is nobody would listen because I'm a male, because I'm homeless, and because I'm disabled. In many of these situations regarding law enforcement, I was blown off. That's the reality of it. With many of these people, with what they've told me, they are absolutely right. Marcia Estrada, when she was citing other examples of situations where they had tried to take it on and CPS would not look at it. That is the reality. Legally, they have to do something about it. With each of these mandated reporters, and in the state of Nebraska, everyone is a mandated reporter, legally, they could spend 6 months in jail and up to a $1,000 fine for not mandatorily reporting. The reality is, many of these people who are professionals who have tried to turn this in are blown off, so they're afraid to do their jobs as mandated reporters. Now, I'm talking obviously about just the professionals in this state and other states, and I'm not referring to the civilians. Legally, because I am disabled, these crimes against me are extra illegal. The reality is, people can use those disabilities to discredit me. They have, they do, and they will again. The legality is that these crimes are wrong to do to anyone. The reality is I don't have any money for a real lawyer. The legality is that it's illegal for people to commit these crimes against me, but the reality is without somebody there in person to prevent these things from happening, and that is the key right there, preventative measures. Right from the very start, I needed someone to go in with me. The reality is people were scared of being targeted. Those preventative measures, me having a safe environment to just sit down with what I had and have someone go in with me so that I could show it. Legally, Kara Heller was supposed to do that with me. Legally, Jen Beebe was supposed to do that with me. Legally, Penny Cooper was supposed to do that with me. Legally, Tamara was actually doing it. Now, in many of these cases, the situation was that it's called dual diagnosis. Dual diagnosis clinics primarily deal with people who have trauma and substance abuse issues. So I have to basically pretend that I'm on drugs, or in the state of Nebraska, all I got to do is smoke pot and record myself doing it. Whether I actually inhale or not is of no consequence. At that point, they can say I have a substance abuse problem and I can get into one of these clinics for help. It shouldn't have to be done that way, but that's the reality of the situation. Dual diagnosis. You have to have two different situations going on at once. With drug addiction, you have to be in recovery and be trying to remain in recovery. In order for many of these programs that people want me to be a part of, in order for me to be a part of those, I have to do drugs. I have to smoke pot, or I have to snort cocaine, or I have to do meth, and I don't want to do any of that. I really don't. The legality of the situation versus the reality. There's the bias, and that's where much of this comes in. Bias-based crimes. Hate crimes are bias-based crimes. If you are harming somebody who is disabled, that is a bias-based crime. Why do people choose the disabled to do these things to? Because it's easy to get away with. The legality of it is that it's against the law to do these things, but the reality is people get away with it by calling their victim mentally ill, loosely blanketing it. And the way that the laws are written are horrible. Because on the one hand, there's disability rights, and on the other hand, there's the mentally ill blanket laws. Mentally ill, as far as the law is concerned, they blanket everybody as a violent schizophrenic. And without someone there to testify on your behalf, that's the way they're going to continue to treat you. The legality is, when I was trying to turn in Scott DaCosta in 2018, I went to Joel J. That's what I was supposed to do, and he blew me off. Legally, that's who I was supposed to go to, and the reality is he blew me off. Now with Mr. Starkey, that's the new county attorney. Legally, when I turned in what I did to him, and I also called him on the phone so that I could make sure that I recorded it, because at the time I didn't have my clandestine recording device. Legally, he was informed. Whether it's written down on paper or not, the fact that he was informed of it is good enough. The reality of it is they say, oh, well, if it's not written on paper. The legality of it, once you've turned in the paper, something is supposed to be done. The reality of it is they can throw away the paperwork and say, well, I never saw it. That's why it's important to record it. Those recordings are preventative measures, your system of checks and balances, just like having someone go in with you, a system of checks and balances. Now, the legality is the next step to contact the Nebraska Attorney General's office, and Polly Olson can testify to the fact that she told me to go to the Nebraska Attorney General's office. And Marcia Estrada told me to go to the Nebraska Attorney General's office. And Missy Bruce told me to go to the Nebraska Attorney General's office. The reality is, the Nebraska Attorney General's office has been blowing me off for years. The reality of it is that Nebraska Attorney General's office told me that some of these crimes I have to turn into the FBI, and some of these crimes I have to turn into the Nebraska State Patrol. That's the legality of it. The reality is that the Nebraska State Patrol never got back to me. The reality is that I have the recordings with the Nebraska State Patrol where they're telling me it's not their job. You're not seeing how complicated this is, are you? I have recordings both on my YouTube and also on my devices of me calling all of these places that I was told to call. The legality of it is, as the victim, me trying to turn it in means that they are supposed to investigate it, especially because I am an at-risk adult. I am an at-risk adult because of the term mentally ill. The reality of the situation is that Nebraska State Patrol told me that I had to go to Scott DaCosta to turn in Scott DaCosta. When I had gone in to turn in Scott DaCosta's deputies to him, there was no action taken by Scott DaCosta against his officers. Legally, there should have been. But the reality is he did what he could to cover up for his officers. That's why you're supposed to go to the Nebraska State Patrol. The reality of the situation is that I have multiple recordings with the Nebraska State Patrol telling me that it's not their job, that it is not their job to police the police. The legality of it is that they are putting me at risk of life and limb by sending the officer that I'm trying to turn in to my door. In reality, what they did is send the officer that I was trying to turn in to my door. Now, all of this could have been prevented by someone doing something other than blowing me off and being realistic. Realistically, if you never try, nothing happens. Realistically, if you never try to stop those predators, they will continue. Now, by trying to turn in Waylon Lolatai and not knowing his name, not being told his name, being prevented from having access to his name so that I could turn him in, legally they have to give me his name. The reality is they didn't. Legally, those body cameras should have been shown in court. The reality is that they weren't. These officers continually charged me with crimes that did not happen. But by not having those body cameras presented to the courts, these officers got away with the crimes that they committed, these bias-based crimes. By calling me mentally ill, which obviously puts me at risk just because of that label, well, they're allowed to get away with the things that they did. That term is used for one purpose and one purpose only when it comes to the courts. The term mentally ill is used to discredit you. Now, the police, by assaulting me and then telling the public that I assaulted a police officer, that is misrepresenting the situation and making me a target. I didn't make myself a target. They chose to target me. Now, those body cameras would have shown that I was not attempting to commit suicide. I was attempting to get help. There is the evidence from Adams County when I was speaking with those officers that were supposed to be investigating Natalie's death. I'm showing them the crimes that were committed against me by Tim Beeson. In those recordings, that because it is a murder trial, they cannot get rid of that evidence. That evidence they can never throw away. So the legality of it is they can't get rid of that evidence. The reality is I still need a lawyer in order to have access to it. And with officers committing crimes against me and then charging me with crimes that never happened, making it their word versus mine by pulling these dirty little tricks to prevent their body cameras from being entered in as evidence, reality is they got away with it. There needed to be preventative measures, and that's something that Miss Peaches either A, didn't understand, or B, she was afraid of. And whichever the case may be, preventative measures were not in place. These preventative measures to protect me are not in place. Calling all of these numbers, let me see where the list is. I'll pause this for a second. Alright. The legality of it is that people told me to contact these numbers: statewide access line, legal assistance, and of course, is that the actual name of those? No. legality of it is that this is the services that we are told to go to. The reality is that these services say that that's not what they do. The legality is that an officer cannot diagnose schizophrenia. The reality is all an officer has to do, because of his position, is to tell the hospital that you're schizophrenic, and they're going to assume that the officer is telling the truth. The legality of it is, once you try to turn in an officer, it is a conflict of interest for you to have to deal with that officer. The reality is that nobody was doing anything, and I had to repeatedly go to officers that I was trying to turn in. The legality of it is, if there is a conflict of interest with a department like Dual County Sheriff's Department, Nebraska State Patrol is supposed to step in. The reality is they outright lied to me over and over, saying that it's not their job. They forced me to go back to an officer that they knew that I was trying to turn in, that I told them repeatedly that I was trying to turn in, that I have recorded over and over them doing these things. It's not their job, it's not their job, it's not their job. It absolutely is. Case in point, Michelle Quinn. Michelle Quinn was the Garden County Sheriff, and she beat the hell out of her girlfriend, and Nebraska State Patrol was the one who was sent to investigate. There are many other situations in this state alone where there was a conflict of interest between a citizen and local sheriff's departments, and the Nebraska State Patrol had to investigate it. Case in point, the situation with Polly Olson. Was that investigated by her friends in the Dual County Sheriff's Department? No, it is a conflict of interest. So the Nebraska State Patrol is supposed to investigate it. Now, mind you, the one with Polly Olson is the same video that Leslie Snell is trying to pretend is a threat against her life. Obviously, the Nebraska State Patrol reviewed the video and did not believe that it was a threat against Polly Olson's life, or a threat against Leslie Snell's life, or a threat against Clint Snell's life. Obviously, after watching the whole video, they realized that these people did not have a leg to stand on, and that they were playing victim. So, the legality of it is that the laws are supposed to be the same for all of us. The reality is that they wanted to continually lie to me and tell me it wasn't their job when it was. Why did they get away with this? Why did they feel so liberal about lying? Because I'm easy to victimize, and they thought they would get away with it. The reality of it is, there is evidence all over my YouTube that shows that I tried. I have mental breakdowns often and frequently, near constantly. Legally, it's against the law for people to gaslight me. The reality of it is that they have gaslighted me to the point where I can no longer function as a human being. I can no longer take care of myself. Yes, I curse, but people are dead. When I speak calmly and clearly and concisely, it turns into an argument with someone who wants to pretend like it's my fault that people choose to victimize the disabled. Or like if I pretend it's not happening, that it's going to stop. The reality of it is, turning a blind eye to these illegal actions only encourages those who are committing these illegal actions to commit those illegal actions more. Case in point, Waylon Lolatai. Got a real big head on him. State of Colorado, after he assaulted me and I was charged with assault, state of Colorado wanted to applaud him. And he got a big head. And Boulder Police Department, who had been doing this for years, and I'd been speaking out for years, they got a big head. And because they got a big head, because they were allowed to get away with it, the reality of it is they did it to Sammy, in a specific, Waylon Lolatai, the same officer who assaulted me. He got a big head, and he did it to Sammy Leon Lawrence IV. He did it to Kelly Clark. He did it to Michelle Rodriguez. And of course, he was bearing a shotgun in the Zaid Atkinson situation. The legality of it is, it's illegal to do these things to any of us. The reality of it is, people only cared about the ones who were in houses. Samuel Leon Lawrence IV, Zaid Atkinson, and of course, Michelle Rodriguez, who was actually homeless at the time that she was assaulted, but she was able to get into housing, and that helped her to have a leg to stand on. Nobody cares about the homeless, but if it's somebody in a house, you go, oh, this could actually happen to me. People say, oh, I could never become homeless, but once they see that it's happening to people in houses, they go, oh my God, this could happen to anyone. If it could happen to Samuel Leon Lawrence IV, it could happen to me. If it can happen to Zaid Atkinson, it could happen to me. If it could happen to Michelle Rodriguez, it could happen to me. The legality of it is that false reporting is against the law. The reality of it is, without enforcement, they're going to do it again. Case in point, Scott DaCosta. He falsely reported on all 4 of these situations. All 4 of them. Now, Mr. Starkey knew that these officers were omitting information. Legally, he is actually responsible for most of this because he allowed it to proceed. He tried to push it forward. He knew that I was trying to turn in Scott DaCosta, and the recordings show that. The recordings also show that I did talk to them calmly, clearly, and concisely, and outline the situation, and I was repeatedly told that these things were not against the law. Legally, if they're telling me that it's not against the law, and I do it and it is against the law, then obviously it was wrong and illegal for these other people to do it to me to begin with, and those officers should have investigated. Now you get to see the legality versus the reality of how jurisdiction works. How these officers, by shipping me around from one jurisdiction to another, get to prevent me from showing evidence from those other jurisdictions or how I was treated in those other jurisdictions. And then it becomes a more complicated situation. Darren O'Connor spoke about that on my YouTube channel. He said that my situation was too complicated. And that was after Natalie was killed. That was years ago that he said that, and it has become more complicated since. The legality of it is that it's wrong to threaten, harass, or intimidate these people, and the reality of it is that it didn't stop them. Just like a protection order. A protection order is just a piece of paper. And that's the horrible reality of it. We have many situations in the United States where people were able to get protection orders, and the person they got a protection order against killed them. We've also got many situations where people got protection orders and somebody else took advantage of that protection order to kill somebody and try to frame somebody else for it. For me, I am afraid that if anything happens to Leslie Snell, that I will be blamed and my friends and family will be threatened. I was afraid of that with Natalie Bollinger. I knew how high risk her situation was, whereas Leslie Snell, she's not likely to be harmed. I mean, here's the thing. If somebody was trying to harm Leslie Snell, I would do everything that I could to stop that person from harming Leslie Snell. I'm not talking about her finances, I'm talking about her physical person. If I saw someone trying to harm her children, I would not just stand by and watch. I would not turn the other cheek. I would not walk away and say, oh, well, I'm not Jesus, like many of these supposed Christians have done. With Natalie Bollinger, though, it's a different story. Unlike Leslie Snell, Natalie Bollinger was extremely high risk. And with her pretending that I stalked her in Virginia, and people actually harming me as soon as I got back to Boulder just a few days later, I mean, that reality really hits home. The reality is people have bias and they make their decisions based on their bias and their opinions. While you say you shouldn't care what other people think, if you're being assaulted over what other people think, you very much do care what that person thinks. You very much do, and you have to. If you actually care about yourself, if you're not sadistic or masochistic, depending on which side that you're on, you know, you're not going to enjoy that. You're not going to enjoy being assaulted for things that you didn't do. But the reality of it is, whether you did it or not, you're still being assaulted. And that assault is still illegal. With Natalie Bollinger, I was afraid that if anything happened to her, that myself and my loved ones were going to be targeted, especially since so many people had already targeted me and my loved ones. Now, primarily, I was the only one threatened, or I was the only one assaulted before Natalie was killed. Sorry. People didn't actually go after my family. Before Natalie was killed, it's not like people were trying to get a hold of my sister and threaten to kill her and my niece directly. They were threatening me that they would do those things. With Natalie Bollinger, I was so afraid of her high-risk situation, her drug use, and the way that she had painted me as some sort of a monster. I wanted to go to prison for the rest of my life, or I wanted my life to end. One or the other. Either that or come forward and tell the truth, for God's sake. That's because I do very much care about human life. I do not want people assaulted. I do not want people killed. When it got to the point where I did actually threaten, I made it very generalized, with the exception of the one towards the president, because I was desperate. I was backed into a corner. I had done everything that I could to call all of these legal resources, and calling them again and again and again and again and again. Now there's a lot here to cover. Now, the problem with legality versus reality is that in reality, these laws are not enforced. In reality, if you are not there with the victim, then it's the police's word versus the victim's, or Tim Beeson's word versus the victim's, or Officer Waylon Lolatai's word versus the victim's. And you got to see that in these cases with Waylon Lolatai, at least 7 assaults caught on camera, they were able to get the body cameras from all of them except for mine. With all of these people telling me that they were being threatened, harassed, assaulted, and intimidated over sticking up for me, if those things are true, they need to be shown in court. But who's going to show them in court? You get to just walk away. That was the situation with me leaving Virginia. With every other situation where I had had an addict who was having a major issue like that, I was able to walk away. I mean, even the situation with Crystal Beauchamp. All 3 times that I rescued her from people who were trying to sexually assail her, in all 3 of those situations, I was able to get her home safely. In all 3 of those situations, because I didn't want to go in and pass the threshold and have sex with her, which she felt that this is what she's supposed to do. This is what many women are taught, that they're supposed to thank a man with sexual favors. I didn't want that. Now, in the situations where she had gone to where I was, obviously when she's walking up to a group of people that I'm hanging out with, like Janine Barrett and Derek Parrish. Now, mind you, Derek Parrish was not old enough for me to hang out with at this time. He was only 17 at the time, but his mother was the one who I was hanging out with. The fact that she had her son with her, obviously she's able to make sure that I'm not doing anything naughty to her son. But that's who I was hanging out with when Crystal Beauchamp, who wanted to be angry because she hadn't gotten what she wanted when she was drunk, she felt as if I had utterly rejected her, and she wanted to take some sort of recourse against me. The reality is she assaulted the shit out of me in front of at least 30 people. That's the reality of the situation. She assaulted me, which is illegal. Legally, the cops are supposed to show up and do something about it because they've been called. A woman who was walking by and saw Crystal assaulting me called it in. So legally, the cops are supposed to come do something about it. Crystal Beauchamp is admitting that she assaulted the hell out of me to these officers who are ignoring her. That's the reality of the situation. The reality is they didn't want to deal with Crystal Beauchamp. The reality is they didn't want to arrest her. So it didn't matter that she assaulted me in front of 30 people. The cops were not going to do anything about it. The term mentally ill is used to discredit victims. The things that I said about Natalie Bollinger were true. She was on heroin. She was using drugs. Her dad did molest her and her sister. Her dad did get drunk and beat her. These are Natalie Bollinger's own words. So if she is saying that I slandered her by saying them, then she is admitting to slander by saying them to me. Now, as far as what do they call that? It's the one that everybody keeps trying to use as an excuse not to come forward. Hearsay. That's what it is. Did Tony DeStassi see Danny's body? Yes, he did, by his own admission. Me just saying it is hearsay. Tony DeStassi admitting it is not. Now, the fact that I was there and a witness means that it's actually not hearsay. But if I were to be somebody who is just relaying the story who had not been there, it would be hearsay. Many people who were witnesses to at least parts of this wanted to say, oh, well, that's hearsay. They wanted to say that they couldn't come forward because they weren't lawyers and they didn't know nothing. And then most of them did. Most of them did know, at least in part, what was going on, but they just never came forward, and they wanted to be pocket lawyers as excuse to not come forward. The legality of it is that they are witnesses and they can be subpoenaed. The reality of it is that a public pretender with an overwhelming caseload does not have time to represent every one of their clients. The legality of it is illegal for guards to haze and harass and assault inmates. The reality of it is they will actually pay other inmates to do that, in addition to going to their fellow officers to assist them in doing those things. And it all comes down to, do we have a way to enforce it? Are those bad body cams on? Do they have those body cameras? Are they forced to have them on while they're on duty? Or can they turn them off and sell whatever narrative that they want? The reality of it is, let me see, we'll make that small, and then we'll scooch this over a bit. Lisa Green and Angela Smith telling me that here's the numbers for me. With Lisa Green, she was saying that she couldn't do all this in a day. Well, she literally dropped it all off on me so that I had less than a day to take care of it myself. Less than a day to try to get an advocate. Less than a day. And she sends me Legal Aid of Nebraska, who I've already called and it's not their job. And Disability Rights Nebraska, we've already called and it's not their job. Adult Protective Services, already called and it's not their job. The reality is, it is actually Adult Protective Services' job, but who's going to make them do it? The reality of it is, Megan Messigadis wrote about the fact that we had gone to all of these places already. That these places that they want to continue to stuff down my face, that this is not their jobs. It's not their jobs, it's not their jobs. That's what these people keep telling me, is it's not their job. And these are the same resources that all the way back in 2017 I had gotten a hold of. Now in 2017, I didn't record it. I didn't have the ability to record it. I also had to make most of these calls alone, but I didn't make all of them alone. Brenda Dickinson made some with me, and Tamara made some with me. Legally, they can be subpoenaed. The reality of it is, no public pretender was actually going to do their job. Now, when I told people I've already called them, they're giving me these same 3 numbers over and over again. I have recordings between me and Tara Smith. I have multiple phone calls between me and Disability Rights Nebraska, multiple phone calls between me and Legal Aid of Nebraska. People say, hey, Sean, you just need to keep at it. You just need to keep at it. Keep on calling these places. The reality of it is, they don't want to hear it. The reality of it is, many of these places want to pretend like I'm some sort of a terrible monster for calling them so often. That's the problem with having to do it myself. No preventative measures to begin with. No safety measures in place, despite the fact that the law outlines many safety measures, and these are the safety measures. With Scott Costa, with it being a safety risk, Nebraska State Patrol, it was their job, and they simply did not do their job. It was the county prosecutor's job to do something about it, and he simply did not want to do his job. The reality of it is that I called these places and I recorded these places telling me that it's not their job. And then on their websites it says that it is their job. With Scott Costa going to him about his officers and him helping them to get away, the next course of action is to go to the county prosecutor. The next course of action is to go to the Nebraska Attorney General's office. The next course of action is to go to the Nebraska State Patrol or the FBI, depending on the situation and the crimes committed. Now, the statements by Megan Messigatis about these, H.E. mustache. The reality of it is, I jumped through all the hoops you're supposed to jump through. That's the reality. The reality is that I tried to do everything the legal way, and it did absolutely nothing, and people ended up dead. The reality is, when I talked to these people calmly, clearly, and concisely, I was blown off, talked over, and continually redirected. And if I don't allow these people to do the redirection and try to work my way back into the actual issue, they're going to get frustrated, flustered, and speak over me and get louder. And it's okay for them. It's okay for them to talk to me like I am a dog, or to talk to me slowly like I don't understand the English language. The reality is, the guy that I was arguing with in my room earlier today, he's absolutely right. The reality of it is that Marcia Estrada is absolutely right. The reality of it is that Tara Smith is absolutely right. The reality of the situation does not meet the legality of it. Restricted number.